Good morning, everyone. This is Wanda Johns with the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. We're gonna get started here pretty soon. I did put in the chat box the link for the captioning service. So if you need that sort of accommodation, please use that link. I'll post it a couple times throughout the presentation. And we're going to give just another minute or two for folks to join up. It looks like I've got a question already. Oh, good morning, Camille. I see a number of people I recognize, and in case you're wondering, yes, this is the training that is mentioned in the HARPS contracts. So thanks to the folks from HARPS who've showed up and are ready to learn about fidelity reviews and permanent supportive housing. Oh, I see our presenter has made it. I'm gonna make her a presenter. And I apologize in advance. I have some dogs that will probably check in from time to time. Pat, I'm not sure why, but it says you're not connected to audio. I do see your slides, so you are presenting. If your microphone is not working, check your keyboard F4, or perhaps it's the mute on the webinar just under the red arrow.
Hello?
Now I can hear you.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. I don't know what I'm sitting here talking to myself.
Well, we're glad you're here, and I didn't give you a very good introduction. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll do that. Hi everybody. I'm Pat Tucker. I work with a group called Advocates for Human Potential. I'm in Chicago, Illinois on a hot, muggy day. And I'm doing this training because I've been doing permanent supportive housing for most of my adult life in some form or fashion. So I really understand what permanent supportive housing is supposed to look like and how to tell if you're doing it right. And so today I'm here to do the training for the Fidelity reviewers. So this training is for those who might have an interest in learning to do a Fidelity review. Um, if you don't have an interest in doing Fidelity review, you will learn some of the information that they're looking for when they come in to do a Fidelity review. But you don't need to be, I mean, it's always good to know what you're supposed to do if you're working in permanent supportive housing. But this just gives you a little bit more information, kind of, it's like, I, the whole purpose of permanent supportive housing and the Fidelity Toolkit is so that everybody knows what the recipe is. There is no secret recipe. Um, and so it will be up to people to take this information and either apply it at their own agency, hopefully, but also can look at other agencies and really learn from what other agencies are doing. So that's my intro. I know we got people in the room. I hope you're all excited. I do have a question for you. How many of you have been doing permanent supportive housing um, for if you can write in the chat box your how many years you've been doing permanent supportive housing? I'm just curious as to who we have in the room, how much experience you have, so that I can kind of tailor this to make sure I hit, what you're looking for. So I see 5 years. I only see one person. Anybody else want to share how long they've been doing it? It would really help in doing this if you could just write in the chat box how many years. You don't have to give me your name. I just want to know how many years or how many months have you been working in permanent supportive housing? Or are you new to it? If you're new, just put new.
This
Um,
this is Wanda. Sorry to interrupt you. Folks are answering in the question pane, so I'll give
oh,
you the rundown.
okay. Okay.
So there's one that's just starting to learn about permanent supportive housing. There's a couple at 1 year. There's a couple at 2 years, a year and a half, 3 to 4 years, 7 months, 2 months, 0, 2 years, 5 years. Supportive housing services, not operating the housing, 15 years. And I've been doing this job for about 2 years now. New, only worked with subsidized, new. Adelina says she's got 3 years, and a couple other people are learning about it and new. One since February, 15 years for Eileen,
Wow.
and former Harps Pier for 2 years, now Pier Bridging. That's Riley Hauser.
Okay.
Um, so
Well, that is very helpful. Thank you, Wanda. Uh,
you're welcome.
so this will be this for some of you. This will be new information because you haven't had it before, and for some of you, this is gonna be you've heard it all and you have specific questions. I really do want you to ask questions if you don't understand something. Um, so I usually do this, but I'm not gonna do the introductions because there are a lot of people on the line, and that will take a lot of time to go through. Um, the housekeeping and the lunch on your own. Pay no attention to it. We don't need you to do a sign-in sheet. But if you have questions, please put your questions out there. Pay no attention to this because we have changed the agenda a little bit, but um, I kind of already did this by having you give me the years that you've been doing this, which was helpful. If we were in a room together, what I would have done was put some of the new people with people who've been doing it for a while, because I think that's one of the ways you learn. The way I teach you, you may pick up on some things, but I think sometimes you want to talk to somebody who has very specific information or can answer specific questions. So as much as we can, if you can use the chat box, if you have questions and write them in the chat box, I may be able to see the questions and be able to answer them. Um, but I would recommend for new people to try to connect to some people who have more experience than you, because that also is helpful in just being able to ask some of those questions.
This is Wanda. I just want to jump in real quick. Some folks are having a hard time locating the chat.
Okay.
So if you go down below the handouts, there should be a little arrow that says chat. And if you click on that arrow, it'll open up a chat box and you can choose to address the entire audience or the organizers and panelists or the presenter or questions to the staff. We can also use the question pane for actual questions. So, but if you want like everybody to see it, it's best to use the chat. I hope that helps.
Yeah, hopefully that helps. So again, on this, we have some resources for you. Please look at the resources. If you have not ever looked at the SAMHSA Evidence-Based Practice Permanent Supportive Housing Toolkit, it is on the SAMHSA website. There's the link for it. Everything about this toolkit is in that link. So there, like I said earlier, there are no secrets here. We're not asking people to do something that they've never done before, or that they don't know what the end product should look like. I'm gonna quickly go through this, but the reason it's called an evidence-based practice is because it has been validated by rigorous research. There have been different investigators who've looked at this, and the Fidelity model that they came up with, the way to measure performance, it works. This model works. It gives you the desired outcomes if you're doing it according to the plan. Um, and it has a manual that goes with it. So all of this works, and it has the guidelines that describe the critical components. And there are other evidence-based practices that I'm sure you've heard of. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the evidence-based practices. So there are some basic premises of permanent supportive housing.
Hey, Pat, this is Wanda. We've
Yes.
got a couple of raised hands.
Okay.
Adeline, I'm going to try to unmute you and see if you want to speak your question. That should do it. Are you there, Adelina?
Hi, Wanda. That wasn't me. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm going to lower your hand then. A couple of people are asking about handouts. We didn't upload any yet. And will the slides be available after the presentation?
Yeah, we'll make sure that we get everybody the slides and some other handouts that I'll be probably going through on this training. So don't worry, you're gonna get it all. We'll make sure you get it. I think we'll have all of your names and email addresses because you've all signed in, so we should be able to get it to you.
Yeah, Amanda usually sends out all the materials after the presentation. We've got one more hand up. I'm not sure if I'm probably gonna butcher this name, and I apologize in advance. Griselda, I'm gonna unmute you real quick because I see your hand is raised. I'm gonna try and unmute you. Oh, she lowered her hand, so I guess she doesn't have a question.
It probably was about the materials, or when can they have copies of everything.
All
And
right.
she probably heard the answer and said, I'm putting my hand down.
All right.
All right. So here are some of the premises of permanent supportive housing that I think if you remember these premises, this is very helpful in understanding how permanent supportive housing works. Um, Clients can make their own decisions. That's critical. Anytime you're doing permanent supportive housing and you say we're going to try to abide by the Fidelity, one of the things you're saying and agreeing to is that clients can make their own decisions. Um, and so that means that takes the pressure off of staff, in my opinion. That takes the pressure off of staff because we don't have to try to make the decisions for people. But one of the things I think is key to remember is that when clients get to make their own decisions, sometimes clients are going to make bad choices, and that's okay. People make bad decisions all the time. Hopefully, we learn from it and we move on and make a better decision the next time. So, our job is not to prevent people from making bad decisions. Our job is to help people when they do make a bad decision, learn from it and move on. But we need to be in the habit of letting clients make their own decisions. We do not know more about the person than they know about themselves. We are not the expert on other people. It's important that clients get to have that as part of their plan. Another premise of permanent supportive housing is that partnerships, good, effective partnerships work together to treat the whole client. What this means is if you're working in the housing department, you need to have good partnerships with other people. You need to have good partnerships because people, when they move into housing, guess what? They're going to have probably behavioral health issues that need to be dealt with. So you need to have somebody who you can have on the team who can provide that behavioral health need. You might need to connect with substance use providers because the person may be dealing with that. Another thing we know is that when people move into housing, physical health issues become an issue uh, because they haven't dealt with physical health issues in a long time. Those might be some of the issues that come up. You need to be able to connect with different people, different groups who have skill sets that we don't have and partner with them. And we need to make sure we're treating the whole client because if we only treat the housing, we're doing a disservice because you can't separate out your housing from your substance use, your housing from your behavioral health, your housing from your physical health. Because guess what? If you have a physical health issue and you need to go into the hospital, it could affect your housing. Or if you somehow develop something that prevents you from taking care of stuff in your apartment, that is going to affect your housing. So we need to make sure we are setting up systems if the person already is working with somebody, we connect with that person with the client's permission and sign off. And if the person doesn't have those, we need to be able to help bring those parties to the table and have the client be served as a whole person and not just this little component because they all go together. Uh, Another premise is that clients need unbiased info from staff to make their own decisions. So our job as staff is not to make decisions. I said that before, but we need to make sure we're giving people unbiased info. A lot of times I hear staff talking to clients and they say stuff like, well, you could choose to go over there, but in my opinion, the right now the Oxford House is the way to go for you because you're wanting to deal with this, this, and this. Well, that's not unbiased info. Unbiased info is, here are the options. You can go into regular housing, but in regular housing, you have to pay rent. What rent is in this area is this amount of money. This is the average of rent amount that you're going to have to pay for a studio or a 1-bedroom, whatever it is that they're looking to move into. There are other options. Let me go through all the options. There is an affordable housing option. Well, we can help you get onto some wait lists because we have a few wait lists that are open, or the wait lists aren't open, but we think they may open up in the next year. But this is what the option is. You can, if you decide that you only want to go into affordable housing, it's going to take maybe 2 to 3 years to get you in. We can put you on all of the different wait lists and see which one pops first, but that's how that's going to work. There's also you can have a roommate. You can pick a roommate if you have somebody you want to live with, or we can see if we have other clients who want roommates, and you can meet them and see if you're interested. But that's another option to put on the table. We put all of the options on the table with the information that we know is truthful. We don't put our opinions into the information, where, somebody may say, I want a regular apartment, and we're sitting there looking at this person going, okay, well, one, you don't have money, and two, how are you going to keep affording this? This is going to set you up for failure. That's not our job. Our job is to be like, okay, so you want this housing, here's what the rent will be. How do you think you're going to make that happen? Or how do you think you're going to pay that rent? You're going to get a job. Okay, let's talk about, getting a job. Let me see, do you have somebody you're working with? And my job is to just go with that person and what they want and not what I think. I may sit there and look at this person thinking, hell to the no, you can't afford a place, you have no money, you've never worked in your life, or you haven't worked in 20 years, and this is pie in the sky. No, we just give the information and we say, okay, so this is going to require you to work. How, do you have somebody you're working with, or do you need me to help you connect you to somebody? And we connect them to somebody if they want to work, and we still work with them to find that housing that's going to work for them. We don't put our biases in there. Another premise, and this is important, our role as clients or staff is to support the client in the journey. We're not driving the bus. The client is driving the bus, and we need to support the client along the way. Again, our support is to just give them information. Our support is to support them in that journey. Sometimes we have to remind people of stuff, because sometimes people will tell you, one of my goals is to stop using drugs. And so if they're picking an apartment in a place that is in a drug-riddled neighborhood, one of the things I might bring up is, okay, remember when we were talking about goals and you said you really don't want to live in a neighborhood with a lot of drug activity. I think this neighborhood might have a lot of drug activity. I just wanted to remind you of what we had talked about, but it's still your choice. That's how we support the clients.
Pat, this is Wanda. I've got a couple questions here. Camille asked, is there somewhere we can find the statistics or evidence they have gathered, I assume around permanent supportive housing?
That absolutely. If you go to that link for the SAMHSA toolkit, they include all the research in that link.
And then Karen asked, what if they don't want a job and think SSI will suffice and they should be entitled to subsidized housing?
Well, then we give them the information about what it takes to get into subsidized housing. And our job is not, I mean, yeah, there are going to be some people that say, I just want SSI and I want a subsidized unit. Give them the information. Okay, right now there are no lists available or no wait list. So one of the things that we're going to have to do if you really want to go into a subsidized unit is wait until the wait list open up. When the wait list open up, we can put your name on the wait list. But and this is when you might be able to expect a callback, or this is how long this wait list is that you're on. Um, that's our job, is to just give the information. We can still work with people to say, okay, I know you only want subsidized housing, but you're homeless right now. And the subsidized housing is going to take a couple of years. If you're willing to, if that's what you want to do is wait for that subsidized housing, then the one thing I can help you with is to get your name on all the wait list. But there's no guarantee that you're going to get into subsidized housing. You have to meet their qualifications, you have to do the paperwork, and you have to meet their criteria. And here's what the criteria is. And that's it. That's all we can do, is give them the information and make sure we're documenting that we're giving them the information. And what information are we giving them? And then document what their response is. If their response is, okay, I'll wait for the subsidized unit, I'll wait the 2 or 3 years, we document that, and we develop a little plan that says, maybe they check in with you every month to see if the wait list is open, and when it opens, you put their name on the wait list. That's all we can do. We need to honor the person's decisions, though, but we also need to make sure we're giving them the information and being clear about this subsidized unit is not going to be overnight. It's not going to happen tomorrow. We don't have that. So if you're homeless right now, and if you think SSI is it for you and you want a subsidized unit, it may take a few years. Then it's their decision to decide something different. Go ahead.
This is Wanda. I just wanted to say that, you know, Social Security, folks that are dependent on Social Security have pretty much been priced out of housing here in Washington State, unless it's a subsidized unit. I've been helping my mom search for an apartment recently, and most places want a person to have 3 to 5 times the rent as income.
Exactly. And that's all, and that's information. That's the information we give to people, because then they have to make a decision. They have to make a decision. Do I want to stay homeless for 3 years while I wait for this subsidized housing that I may or may not get into? And what we can say to people is, okay, so this is going to take 3 years. What are you going to do in the meantime? Are you going to stay on the streets? Or maybe we can talk about some other options. Maybe we can look at maybe a roommate where you can afford to pay half the rent and the roommate pays the other half. So that's basically all of our jobs, is to give information. This should be a relief for staff, because it means that you don't have to make decisions for people. You only get to make decisions for yourself and for your little kids, while they let you still make decisions for them. But it doesn't mean that you get to make decisions for people. People get to make their own decisions, and then they have to live with those decisions. Our job is to just keep giving them the information and asking them the questions. You want this subsidized unit? May take 3 years, and you may not get in. You may not, here's their criteria, but they still go through a process for you to get in. If you're willing to sit back and wait for that, fine, but maybe we can do something in the meantime. The other premise is that clients need individualized plans because clients have different needs. So we can't, one of the things that is disappointing is when you look at somebody's um goals and their goals looks like everybody else's goals. When you see that, what that says to somebody looking at your charts is that you are not individualizing plans, or you are just writing in the same thing for everybody and really not honoring that person's choice. That's what we don't want to see. We want to we prefer we preferably would like to see everybody's plans, individualized plans, be in their own words. So whatever the words are that they say, we quote them verbatim, and that way everybody knows that those are the client's goals. Hopefully, did this make sense?
Pat, I've got another question here. Jamie asked, it should be, except that many programs continued funding depends on successful outcomes, which to funders equal people placed in housing. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong about that. I mean, but in if you're doing permanent supportive housing and you're doing it to Fidelity, some people should get housing. I mean, we definitely want people getting housing. And you're going to have a lot of people who want subsidized housing. Your job becomes, a little trickier because what you have to do is give them the information, but then what you also have to do is say, you're on the streets now. If you need housing, how about let's look at some different ways to get you into some housing right now. Let's develop a plan. Okay, we understand that you want to be in a subsidized unit. There are no subsidized units available right now. So let's make a long-term plan, if that's okay with you, where the subsidized unit is the end goal, but right now you still need a place to live. And what can we do to put you in some place right now? So hopefully that helps, because here's the thing, a lot of times where programs fail is they put people in housing that the person didn't want, and then the person messes it up, and then you're left with a pissed off property manager or landlord, and the person is back on the streets. The way to avoid people being back on the street is to listen to the clients and listen to what they want and what they need, and work with them to try to get that, but also teach them how to deal with it, how to maintain it, what are the skills needed that they're going to have to do to keep housing. I assume that people don't know how to take care of their housing um, until they show me that they do. So I will go over stuff that is involved in having an apartment. They may say, "Oh, I don't need that information." I find a way to figure out if they know it and what I need to help them with, to help them maintain the housing. But yeah, the goal is to get people into housing. But the goal is to get them in housing that they want and housing that they can maintain and want to maintain. So I have some things down here that I wrote down that some of the key elements of, and what I want you to do is take a couple of minutes, read through these, and tell me which one of these you think is the most difficult. And I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes to just look at this and tell me what you think. All right. So any feedback we're getting, Wanda?
So I've got something here from Jamie. Yes, it does help for some. Some of the challenge there is that if we were able to get someone into a short-term housing situation, they no longer qualify for permanent subsidized housing programs because they are no longer homeless by HUD's definition. But I do 100% agree with what you're saying about the fidelity of PHS.
Yeah, and so that's information we need to give to the client, right? That's information they should know. They should be very clear that um that this is what's going to happen. So we don't want them to run into issues where they don't know.
And then Keneal typed in tenants having lease in own name. I'm not sure what the thought was behind that.
That's the one she's thinking is the most difficult.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have comments about which ones they think are the
Support.
most difficult?
Alan says supportive services are available. And then Michael said sometimes housing is only available if they are in a mental health program. And then Matthew said visitors for clients have been a huge challenge for us. And Leilani says the rules, I think. And
Okay.
Emily says, I work in a facility that is PHS. Sometimes behaviors
Hi.
associated SUD and mental health or physical lack of independence causes their housing to be at risk. And then she corrected herself, PSH. And then Jamie says visitors are often a huge challenge here as well. While they're legally allowed, landlords often single out our clients because of visitors.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Thanks. All right. Sorry about that. So everybody has one thing that they find difficult, but it's important that tenants have a lease in their own name, because that's how you know if people have rights of tenancy, right? For all of us who have an apartment, we have something in our own name that holds us accountable. So that's one of the key elements of doing this, is you have to make sure that people have a lease in their own name. Um, Another thing that we don't want to have is that we want to make sure that leases do not have any special provisions that would be found in leases of someone without a mental health disability. So this is basically what this one is saying, is don't put everybody in some type of special housing, because everybody doesn't want that type of special housing. So I've seen people use Oxford housing, and um and that's fine if the person wants Oxford housing, but we don't want everybody in Oxford housing. We don't want everybody in the same building because you found one landlord so you really need to make sure that people have that one of the options on the table is regular apartments, whether they can get into it or not. That has to be one of the options. And we need to help people figure out how to get prepared for that, if that's one of the options that they choose. We have to make sure that supportive services are available and accessible, but they're voluntary. To me, this is the hardest one, because what this one is saying is that we We cannot make people use the services that we offer to help them stay to keep their housing. But what that means for us is that we have to provide services that people really want, or that person finds helpful. So we can't just we can't do the stuff we used to do if we worked in an office where everybody has a budget. We want to work with a budget with everybody. Well, people may need to work on a budget, but we don't have to do the same process of sitting down, going through a budget. There are fun ways to do a budget, ways that you can do budgets differently so that people get that information. So I really think we need to look at that and make sure that we're providing different types of services to people. So
Hey, Pat, I got 2 more questions here. Jamie asked, if a client is living in a unit that is master leased by an organization, does that still count as having a lease in their own name?
if you're doing master leasing, the agency will have the lease in their name, but the agency should lease to that person and have that person do a lease to the master leaser or to the agency. So having a lease just means people have that their housing is not connected to them being, doing other things in a program. So yes, you can do master leasing, and in master leasing, usually the agency does a lease with the person.
And
And
I think it
so,
depends on the terms of those leases. If they are a typical lease that you would find in any other landlord-tenant
right,
situation, then that would be more like having a lease in your own name. If they have special terms and conditions, such as no guest after 10, or, something that you wouldn't find in a regular lease, then maybe that's something you need to look a little closer at.
yeah, exactly. I mean, so you could just do a typical lease. The agency that's doing the master lease should be doing a typical lease with people who are coming into the program, and because the master leasing is great if you can do that, but you still want to hold people accountable to the rules at the rules that govern the building. So, things like paying rent on time, if they pay rent, things such as, let not playing their music too loud after 10 o'clock. Those typical things are in a lease. People should have quiet enjoyment of their environment. Um, so the lease should only be a regular lease. And if you're doing master leasing, you can do a regular lease with everybody who's in in that housing. And that way you don't have to worry about people not having a lease in their name.
And the next question is from Sharon, and she says, I have clients that have barriers that the Northwest Justice Housing Project are tired of going back and forth with landlords that overcharge on move outs, causing additional barriers besides mental health and substance abuse.
No, and that is an issue. And so landlords, the thing is we need to find landlords who we can work with. And that that to me is one of the biggest issues, is finding those landlords. And that means that we need to really go out and develop some good relationships with these landlords so that landlords will work with you.
This is
And
one that, again, I'm just going to put a plug in real quick for Department of Commerce has a landlord mitigation program and a tenancy sustaining program that will help you in your landlord outreach. Basically, they will cover damages for tenants that have received subsidies, even if they're short-term subsidies. They also have funds to get an apartment ready to rent to somebody that's receiving subsidies. And there's some stipulations about if they claim damages, they're not, and they're reimbursed by Commerce, they're not allowed to pursue the tenant for those damages they've already been recouped for.
Yeah, and I think Wanda is correct, and I think if you're not connected with them, you should connect with them, and so I think that is one of the things you really want to do um is to connect with them, um and make sure that the clients don't get punished because the the landlord wants to punish somebody for doing something. So I, please connect with that, and don't forget that that's a resource for you to help you do this, and to make it so that landlords don't hold people accountable. Plus, the most important thing with the landlords is really developing that relationship, and you have to spend time on developing that relationship. And I used to be one of those landlords that you're working with or trying to work with. Um, and a lot of times I had people coming in talking to me, promising me the moon and the sky. And guess what? The person moves in and the person has a problem. And the first time I called the agency looking for help, the person that I worked with is no longer there at the agency, and there's nobody that can help me. So now I'm the landlord and I'm stuck with this person in my housing who I was promised people would help with, and there's nobody to help me, and the person's having problems, and my only alternative is to go through evictions. As a landlord, that's the last thing I want to do because going through evictions are costly. And it's not going to help that client because now they're going to have an eviction on their record. So one of the things that you have to do when you're developing these relationships with landlords is make sure that when you're promising stuff that you can deliver. And whatever you're promising, you need to have records of it so that the next person behind you can make sure that they're offering or that they're keeping up with what you promised with that landlord. Making sense so far?
Somebody asked to please repeat. So, Department of Commerce has the Landlord Mitigation Fund and the Tenancy Sustaining Fund, and apparently assistance to prevent eviction. Nick Yuva is the gentleman at Commerce that works with the landlords. And I'll try and include that in the notes that go out, the links to those pages. And it does change the nature of the landlord outreach when you say, hey, not only do we have great tenants that you could work with, but we've got some resources to help you sustain your business, which is providing housing. So,
Well, and the other thing that they offer is if a landlord's place is not up to standard, there's a set amount of money to help get that unit up to standard. And so, the landlords can actually benefit from this if they take advantage of it. So please go to that and read all of the information. I went to it and read it. That's how I know they have some money that you can offer the landlords to get a unit up to code. Not if it's a pigsty. I mean, but some basic things that might need to be changed or may need to be, maybe the place needs to be painted and holes in the wall need to be fixed. But that resource is there for you, and it's also something that landlords should feel more comfortable with, knowing that if the person moves out and they had more damage than is normal, that the landlord's going to be made whole again, is not going to be punished for working with somebody who needed more, or just didn't know how to keep their unit in reasonable condition.
So Jan asked if it would the money apply for getting something wheelchair accessible. I'm not sure about that, Jan, but if
No,
not, we've
there.
got Gosh.
Yeah, I was going to say there are other programs that will help with that, because you're talking about a reasonable accommodation. And so there are other programs that will pay for things like building in a wheelchair ramp. Um, and again, with the wheelchair ramp, you also have to have the landlord buy off on it. And so reasonable accommodations is something you want to look at. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about reasonable accommodations. If you're interested in reasonable accommodations, I recommend you let either Amanda or Kimberly know about that you have an interest in reasonable accommodations. I can definitely do a training on that. Reasonable accommodations are your friend, and it means that you can get some definite resources to help people who need reasonable accommodations in their apartments. Some people may need a reasonable accommodation because they don't get their check until the 8th of the month and rent is due on the 1st. You can ask landlords for a reasonable accommodation so that this person can pay their rent on the 9th of the month since they get their check on the 8th. And so that way they don't get charged the late fee. So you can use reasonable accommodations in a lot of ways. I highly recommend you get trained on it, because you can also use reasonable accommodations if some people have been arrested, but the arrest was due to something like their mental health issue. You can get that, you can ask the landlord to ignore that arrest because it was based on the fact that it was based on their mental health and not anything else. But that's a whole nother training. And so if you have an interest in it, or even if you have an interest in it, you can let Wanda know, and by writing something down, and then that's something that we can talk about, and let you know when there's going to be a training on reasonable accommodations.
I already made a note, and let's see. Monica asked, do they provide funds if a tenant destroys an apartment? And Monica, the answer is yes. There are criteria though. You have to have like a walkthrough and pictures of the apartment before it was rented, like at lease signing, and then afterwards. And the landlord actually has to apply for those funds.
So the answer is yes, but here's one of the things that I think Wanda said that you should do anyway. When a person finds housing that they want and that they like, you should take pictures of that apartment and put it in the file folder. If you see any damage, you should take pictures of the damage and put that in the file folder. So when the tenant moves out, that they're not charged for pre-existing damages to a unit. That's something you should do automatically for everybody. And then at the end of move out, you do the same thing. You take pictures. If there's additional damage, then yes, the person can be held liable for that. And that's something you can work with the landlord to use that that extra money for. Um, but that should be something that is done regardless, is taking photographs. And just on a personal note, if you're getting an apartment, you should do the same for your own apartment. So that's not something special for this program. That's just one of the general things that I, as a landlord, always advise people to do, because that way there's no arguments at the time of move out. If I'm going to hold people accountable for stuff, if it was already there, the only proof you have is a photo or something in writing that you put in the lease, or you wrote in the lease, place has a window that doesn't work. And where's that window that doesn't work? That's the only proof you have of that. Otherwise, it's the landlord saying that damage wasn't there and they owe me for that. So, um, so here's some more elements for permanent supportive housing. Housing is not time limited, and the lease is renewable at the tenant's or the owner's option. So the thing is that we should not be putting people in time limited housing unless that is the person's choice, and that choice needs to be documented. So if people want to go into some special type of housing that's temporary housing, that needs to be in the chart that this is the person's choice and this is why this person chose this. If there's nothing in the charts and a person is in that type of housing, the thing that we're going to look at is that the staff made this decision to put this person in temporary housing. It wasn't the client's choice. Hopefully that makes sense. Um, The other thing we need to do is we need to ask people about their housing preferences. We need to offer them the same range of choices that are available to others at their income level in the same housing market. So we need to put the options on the table. Whether we think they're realistic or not, let the person choose. And somehow you need to document that in the file. And some places they have forms. I know that there are forms in a file that permanent supportive housing has that you can look in, and you can steal that form and put it into your files if you don't have a form. And it's what's the name of that database, Wanda? Is it where they have the forms for permanent supportive housing that other programs have come up with?
Are you talking about the wiki?
Wiki, yes, Wiki. If you are not connected to Wiki, you need to be connected to Wiki. Wiki has lots of great forms, because a lot of where people struggle in the Fidelity and meeting when people come in to do a Fidelity site visit, a lot of times where you fail or where people fail is they didn't do a good job of documenting. And documentation is crucial. And there's somebody developed a form, and it's in Wiki, and it is easy form, one pager that you can fill out that shows that the client had that you offered the client the range of choices, and here's what the client decided. We need to also, as a part of the key elements, is put one affordable option on the table. And that means that we need to know what those affordable housing options are. It doesn't mean that the affordable option is available right now, but what it does mean is that that the person is aware of that there is an affordable option, and that they will, it won't be available for 2 or 3 years, but here's the affordable option. The other thing we need to do in permanent supportive housing is make sure we integrate people into the community. Uh, that has been proven to help people. It always is helpful when people are when they're in the community, there's the community pressure and people fit in better. People aren't stigmatized because, sometimes when you see a building and that building is for people with special needs, it becomes a stigma. Anybody going in and out of that building, people treat differently because they think something's wrong with them. We want to put people into the community. And so we need to try to make sure that housing is integrated as much as we can possibly do. Now, that doesn't mean if a person wants to move into some special type of housing that we don't put them in, but we need to make sure that's documented. So if the housing is not integrated, there should be something in the file to state that this is the person chose this, and we recognize that it's not integrated, but this was the person's choice, and this is why they chose that place.
Pat, Nicolina asked, how do we support when a participant chooses to move into a program that doesn't support the peer model? For example, a program that doesn't allow individuals to make their own decisions.
As long as we put all the options on the table and we have documentation of that, and the person chose this housing and we have documentation of that, that's all we are asked to do. People can make that choice of choosing housing that doesn't fit with the recovery model. As long as it's their choice, that's fine. Remember, choice trumps everything. So for those who are new to this and for those who've been in it for a long time, nobody ever gets a perfect score in permanent supportive housing Fidelity reviews, because it's all based on choice. So we have to look at people's choices. So some people are going to choose things that we don't think that don't fit within this Fidelity. That is okay. It's okay for people to choose that, as long as we have it documented and we make sure we put all the options on the table. Now, here's where you get into trouble, is if everybody in your agency decides to go into this type of housing. Now, then that looks suspicious. Everybody you worked with, all 28 people went into this type of programming. What are the odds of that? What are the odds that that all of these people, 28 people, chose this? It's probably not going to happen. So the thing is, the more people you work with, the more leeway you have for people to make those type of choices. Now, your scores will be affected by that, but that's not a negative thing. That's a good thing, because we rather see that than you not giving people choices. So, yeah.
I'm just gonna butt in real quick. Alexa asked, how do we view the wiki? Alexa, I'm gonna have Amanda send out the link to the wiki so everybody can get signed up and have access to that after the presentation.
Yeah, I highly recommend you get it. Some people have put a lot of work into forums, and we've asked them to let us put it on wiki so that other people could benefit. That's one of the benefits of going out and doing Fidelity reviews. For those of you who will choose that, is that you get to see some of the very creative things that other people have done to deal with the paperwork. So it's important that tenants have a choice about the support services they receive, how often they receive it, what do they want, how often. So it's important that we let the person choose the services that they want. We should not be thrusting services on people when they don't want it. So I know everybody in here has a tendency, if a person has a behavioral health issue, think that it's hard not to think, oh, they need to be taking medication. And so we need to kind of, stay on them about it. If this is not something that the person wants to work on, um, the only thing we can do is try to work with the person around, okay, when is it going to become critical? If you're not taking your meds, what should we do when you get to the point that you need to be hospitalized? I mean, how will we know that? What should we do? What do you want us to do? But we do not have the responsibility to make people take their medication. We just need to make sure that we are offering the services, that we have a full range of services, and that we're listening to the person. So another thing is that the job of the support services is to promote recovery and help tenants to choose, acquire, and keep housing. So the choose is crucial, and the keeping is crucial. The acquiring, yeah, that's you can't do the other things if you don't acquire it. But that's our job, is to help people, because we know that housing helps people to recover from whatever it is that they're trying to recover from. We know that tenants' needs change over time, so we need to be flexible with our services. We cannot have things such as every tenant will be seen every week, because that might not work for that person. And what will happen is you'll go to work, meet with this person at their housing, and they won't answer the door, or they won't be there because they don't want that. So we need to make sure we're working with them to set up a schedule. How often do you want us to come over? How often do you want to see us? Do you want us to come to your place, or you want to meet someplace else? We need to give people those options. And then we need to expect that things will change. Sometimes when people move in their housing, I'm there a lot. I'm there helping them to make sure everything's going smoothly, to make sure that they are not forgetting anything. And then I may start seeing them once a week if that's something they want. And then um if that doesn't work, if they say once a week, okay, I'm getting to a point, I don't, it's not I don't need to see you that often. We may move to once a month if that's what the person wants. um and then I've had some people, we've gotten to the point that they didn't want any meetings with me, and they said, I'll call you if something's wrong, or if I need something. And I may say, well, can we just do a quick phone check-in once a month, just so that we both are, don't have to worry about, forgetting about to call each other, or check in. And if they're okay with that, then we just do a check-in once a month. And I note that in my files that this is what the person wanted. Whatever that conversation, I have to make some notes. Um, for those of you who are doing master leasing or have your own housing, um, you need to be very careful to keep the property management function separate from the support services function. The property management function should be to take care of the housing, to take care of the building, and the services gets to provide the services. Because that's one of the elements of permanent supportive housing, and that's one of the things that we know works, is that keeping the property management separate than the services is crucial. Property managements don't Property managers don't need to know what disability a person has. They just need to know that this person is in the housing, and this person has a responsibility to take care of that housing, and to make sure that um, that people are getting what they need in their apartment. That's all the property manager's job is. Um, we need to what Another element of doing permanent supportive housing is to do a person-centered assessment. Um, Usually this is done face to face, but in these days it could be virtual. You could do it, on Zoom. Um, you can, if you meet face to face, you can sit with mask on, but we want to get to know the person. We don't want to just, say what type of housing you want. Can and we need to make sure that we are um figuring out what is this person's strengths. What are they good at? What do they do well? We need to know what their assets are. And when I say assets, I'm not talking about anything other than, other strengths that they may not have identified as a strength. Do they have the ability to find resources on their own? Do they have a vehicle to get around in? Do they have somebody who can drive them around? Um, do they have other people in their life that are important? What are their preferences? What are their needs? What are their challenges? One of the questions I always ask, and I think it's important to ask, is have you ever had your own place before, and what happened? What happened with that place? What went well? What didn't go well? Because that's going to be an indication of things that you might have to deal with in this next place. So if somebody got housing and then they relapsed and ended up using and lost their housing because of that, um, that may be something that we may want to talk about, having a plan, or the person developing a plan with us about how can they prevent this from happening again. That doesn't mean that we're saying they have to be clean and sober. It's just trying to come up with a plan to not allow this to happen again. Um, I've had people say, well, everything was going great, but then my daughter got kicked out of her apartment and she needed a place, so I moved her in. Oh, by the way, my daughter has 4 kids, so in this 1 bedroom apartment, I had my daughter and her 4 kids living with me. Then how one of my questions is going to be, so how are we going to deal with this if you get this housing? How are we going to make sure that this is not going to happen again? um because we want to make sure that we're looking at the total person and not just assuming that the person doesn't have strengths, because everybody who comes to you has strengths. I mean, the fact that they're still living and are surviving, their strengths there, and we need to be able to identify those. We need to be able to use those. So if somebody's good at going out and finding resources, they can help find their own place. They could have we both will have tasks. You go out and look at 3 places and I'll talk to 3 landlords, and then we'll meet back and we'll talk about what we both saw out there. I The other thing is we need to educate people about housing options to ensure informed choice. So that means we need to be clear about all of the options, and we need to have unbiased information. So when we're explaining it, we know what we're talking about. So if you're talking about some type of subsidized housing, you need to know what the criteria is for that support that subsidized housing. You can't just say, well, there's a housing program, oh yeah, and it's subsidized, and we should put that on the board. I think you're doing a disservice if you don't say to the person, here's the criteria to get into that building. You have to be homeless. You have to have this. Your income has to be at this level. And also there's a long wait list. And so then the person can say, okay, I make that as that's my choice. And then you go into, okay, so what are you going to do in the meantime? Well, I guess, can I go into some type of housing? And then that's when we come back and say, well, remember I said the criteria for the subsidized housing was homelessness. If you're housed, you're not homeless. So that's going to negate you from getting into that subsidized housing. So what is it that you want to do? And I know this is not fair, and but we have to be honest with the clients and make sure they have the information they need to make an informed choice.
Now I see Cedric Bradley has his hand raised.
Okay.
Oh, he just took it down. Never mind.
I go a little bit over informed choice. I'm not going to go through all of this, but informed choice is simple. It means that people have all of the information that is relevant so they can make a choice. So that means it has to be unbiased, it has to be factual, and we lay out all of the options with all the information. And sometimes we need to make sure that we give the information to the person in a way that they understand it. So sometimes, some people get it if you write it down. We can write down stuff and sit down with people and go through it. Um, we can, people can be creative about how we have this conversation, but we need to make sure that people understand all of the information that we're giving them. Some people have asked me this question: why do we have to do a fidelity assessment? And here's what I usually say. Um, we know that this program works and we know that it works well. What we need to do is make sure that um, if something is not going well, say you're doing this program and you're not getting anybody housed, and you don't know what the heck's going on and why it's not working, why aren't people getting housed, or everybody's getting housed but everybody's losing their housing after 2 months. How do you go in and find out what's going on? You have to have some type of set something in place to be able to go in and figure out where the problem is. Um, so that's basically doing fidelity lets you go in and see how this program is actually working and what you have control over and what you don't have control over. For instance, you don't have control over the affordable housing unless you have a building that you operate. You don't have control over that. So what you would need to do is to figure out a way to um, form a partnership. Um, but you do have control over forming those partnerships. You don't have control over the housing. So if I come in and I'm looking at your program and you're saying to me, we're having a trouble getting a landlord, my question is going to be, how often are you going out trying to develop those relationships? If you have the documentation, we can look at that easily and see, oh, well, you're only going out once a week for a couple of hours. That's probably why you're not finding landlords, because that is going to require more of your time, more effort than 2 hours a week. Um, so assessing fidelity gives you a chance to really look at your program, look at all of the different components and figure out where things are working well and where things are not working well. And then you can adjust. It's hard to adjust if people are all doing their own thing. And another reason why we do fidelity is, and this is for everybody here who has worked on a grant, everything that is measured is the stuff that we do. So if we don't measure things, it won't get done. So doing fidelity means that things are getting measured. It means that you're paying attention to it. Yeah, go ahead.
I got a question from Michael about where do you bill the outreach? And Michael, I don't know about what programs you're working with, but I do know that Harps has it as a deliverable in their contract to do at least 5 landlord contacts a month.
All right. Thank you, Wanda. Again, that I'm not gonna beat you over the head with this, but the studies that show that permanent supportive housing is effective, that continues to grow. We know that long-term outcomes have been positive, um, and it's a good return on investment. Um, One of the things that we need to be able to do is to show funders that this works and that this is why they should put their money into it. Um, so that's important to keep in mind, is that um, funders want to know where their money is going to, and they want to make sure that programs are good. And so we know that this works. And so, in order to sell it to funders, we have to continually do these assessments to show that our programs are work. Um, does everybody know what all the dimensions of housing or permanent supportive housing are? And I know I'm gonna let you write down whether you know or not, but do you know what all of the dimensions of it are?
Emily says she would love a refresher, please. Camille says, I know there are 7. And Alan, I've read through them. Sarah said mostly. And Michael says voice and choice. Ebony would like a refresher as well. And Sarah said mostly.
All right, I figured that people wouldn't remember them. So here are the 7 dimensions of permanent supportive housing. Choice of housing. We talked about that. People get to choose. Um, the other one, separation of housing and services. We kind of hit on that one too. Keeping the property management function separate from the services function. We'll talk a little bit more about all of these. Another dimension is decent, safe, and affordable housing. So the decent and safe means that there's um, a walkthrough of the apartment and everything is in working order. And in Wiki, there's a form if the housing is not subsidized. We teach, there's a form that's fairly easy for how regular staff can do a walkthrough of an apartment building or an apartment to make sure that that apartment is clean and it is decent and safe. But if it's subsidized, um, we assume that the building has had HUD come through and do a housing quality um, form, which means that they found the housing to be in good shape. But again, in Wiki, there's a form there in case it's not subsidized that anybody can do. You walk through the unit, you fill out that form, you put it in your file to show that the place either was safe and decent or not. And now I've had people move into housing that was not decent and safe. And I've explained to them that, this housing is not decent and safe. We can try to work with the landlord if you like to get some things taken care of. And that's where I go back to the landlord mitigation funds. Or, the person may say, no, I'm fine with it as is. This is what I want. I can tell you stories of some of the choices that people have chosen. But again, it's their choice. And you need to let people make that choice. We talked about the housing integration. We want people to be integrated into the community. So that's another dimension. Rights of tenancy. That means that there's a name, their name is on a lease. And that should be in the file, and you should all have um, a copy of a person's lease, because that shows that the person has a lease and it's easy to look at for all of the people that you house. Access to housing. This one means that that people only have to say, I want housing to get into your programs. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because that not only, when we're doing a fidelity assessment, we're not only looking at whether or not you have access issues, but if you're working in an agency, say you're in a behavioral health agency, and the only way people can get to the housing department is by a referral from the the doctor or a referral from their therapist. What we look at is we want to make sure that that therapist and that doctor are referring people that say, I want housing. If they're not referring them to housing because they don't think the person can work, I mean, that person can be in their own housing, that's going to affect your score. So the important thing to remember is, if whoever you're working with need to abide by some of these same principles. If it's in your agency needs to understand that people need easy access to housing. All they have to say is, I want housing, and whoever it is they say it to needs to refer them over to housing. And we talked a little bit about the flexible voluntary services. So that's one of the things that people we need to make sure we're offering. So is there a question?
Yeah, Bill Coleman has his hand raised. Did you want to ask a question, Bill? I can unmute you. Go ahead, Bill.
No, that was on accident.
Oh, sorry.
How do I take it down? There we go. Okay.
All right. So here's the thing. I want people to write down in the box or wherever you're writing at all the types of housing choices that we can offer people. And that means not just what we think is available, but what are all the options that we can offer somebody. I'll give you a few minutes to write in the chat box.
Griselda has her hand raised. Griselda, did you want to speak? I'm going to unmute you here. Let me see. Oh, you're not connected to audio, it says. Let me try and unmute you. It says you're self-muted. So perhaps F4 on your keyboard or somewhere on the webinar screen. Well, she took her hand down, so.
Okay. So are people writing in types of housing?
I am seeing the question pane scroll. Let's see. Matthew said RRH.
Rapid rehousing.
Transitional housing, scattered site, recovery based, such as Oxford, or faith based from Nicole or Nicolina. And let's see, Canil says permanent, Oxford, temporary, seasonal, transitional. Sarah says transitional, PSH, regular apartments, regular in quotes. Roommate situations. Emily says shelter, day center, PSH, independent, SNF, or skilled nursing facility, assisted living. Celia says shared housing, single occupancy. Mindy says tent city, tiny home villages, transitional, sober living, group homes, subsidized housing, rental rooms and private home, mother-in-law housing, mobile home rental, trailer rentals, safe parking at churches. Sarah says houses for rent, seeking out buying a home depending on income, at least explore it. Andrea says SRO, single room occupancy. Alan says recovery housing. Jamie says recovery, transitional, supportive housing buildings, adult family homes. Ebony says Oxford, roommate agreement, scattered site, permanent, shelter, independent, adult family home. And Jamie said scattered, subsidized, scattered market rate.
Perfect. So all of the choices that are available in your area, including regular housing, needs to be on the list that you go over with the person. So if you have tiny homes in your area, you go over that. All the options need to be on the table. If we don't put all of the options on the table, we are doing a disservice to the client. We need to put all of the options on the table, including some of the necessary information about that type of housing. How, if you're putting tiny homes on the table, what's the criteria to get into a tiny home? What does the client need to do? And so we need to make sure that we are giving people information about where, what the types of choices are and what information there is about those choices. If the option is regular housing, that means a lease. That means that if the person doesn't have the income, at some point, if they choose that, we need to start talking about how are they going to pay for it.
Hey, Pat, Cedric added RV rent, and then Jamie asked, do we include the options that exist but are not necessarily immediately available?
Yes, please include the options that are not immediately available, because people might want to wait for that, or they might want to work towards that. So now we put all the options on the table, not just the ones that are immediately available. That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that. So what happens is people most times only put the available options. They don't put the options that are not available right now, and that is going to cause you to lose points. And it's also going to make it so that we're not giving that client all of the information so they can make an informed choice. So that's types of housing. With the choices of living arrangements, this is another thing that we need to make sure we're going over with people. Is it going to be just that person living in the apartment, or are they having other people living with them? Or do they want other people to live with them? And that's going to affect choice, right? Because if it's one person, but they say, well, I want my boyfriend or my girlfriend to move with me, and they have 2 kids, we don't want somebody moving into a 1-bed unit and then sneaking in their girlfriend and her 2 kids, or their boyfriend and their 2 kids. We want to find housing that works for that unit of people. If that's what the client wants, then we need to say, okay, if you want this girlfriend and these 2 kids to move in with you, then we need to make sure that the girlfriend can be on the lease. And we need to find housing that's going to be appropriate for 2 people and 2 kids, or 2 adults and 2 kids.
I
So
just want to throw in there that some folks are involved with CPS and might be trying to get back their kids, and that's important to know if you're helping them with housing. So also, it looks like Bill Coleman has raised his hand again. I don't know if it was intentionally or unintentionally, but I did lower it once, and I'm going to let you speak, Bill.
No, for some reason it keeps raising it. My cursor's not even near there.
Huh, I'm just gonna keep putting it down then.
Yeah, just
Uh,
keep it down for me, please. Thank you.
I'll
all
try.
right. So it's important to know what a person's long-term goals are. If it's to get their kids back, then that's gonna affect choice. I mean, it may not affect choice immediately, but maybe down the line. So if they say I want to get my kids back, then we need to have a conversation where we're saying, well, what is it going to take to get your kids back? Have you found out, what you need to do to get your kids back? Um, and is that something that we need to plan for right at this move or in the next move? Or, because that way people can have informed choice. That mom or dad may say, yeah, it's going to take me at least a couple of years to get them back, but that's something I want to move towards. Um, and so that's something that you can help that person develop a plan for how they're going to do this. Hopefully I'm making sense. We're going to take a break in a little bit. I think, we will need to take some breaks in this to let people, absorb some of this information. So I'm going to go over this and then we're going to take a little break. Separation of housing and services. We need to make sure that people know they don't have to participate in support services to keep their housing. That should be a part of if you're doing permanent supportive housing, that should be part of your policy, is that the housing is separate from the services. People can move into the housing and not ever talk to services. And that's an option. And that means if we want people to use our services, we have to make sure we're making our services that things that they need to do or want. Um, we need to make sure that housing management is doing housing management. We can't kick a person out of their housing because they don't want to work with services. And so that's important to have. Um, so with that, I'm gonna say we take about a 15-minute break and we'll come back. Thanks. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about applications for people experiencing homelessness. Um, so some of the benefits of motivational interviewing with people experiencing homelessness is speaking about that. She wasn't really sold on it yet, but she brought it up, and
I have a question for everybody. Anyone know why choice is so important? I can't hear anyone. It says somebody's speaking, but let me see if any hands are raised. Amy answered in the question pane, encourages autonomy. And Colleen said because it empowers our participants. I think Pat might be back. I am going to unmute her. Sorry, Pat. Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. We were just having a little discussion about why choice is so important. And
Okay.
Keneal said if they say their
So
choice.
I missed what the question. Yes. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I just asked why choice is so important. And Keneal says if they have their say in their choice, they're more willing to work for it. And Ebony says we want to make sure the peer is comfortable and not forced to be in a place to where they do not want to be. And I agree with all that, but also I think that a lot of individuals who have been maybe in the state hospital or some other setting where they don't get any choices. I think it's kind of like a muscle. If you don't use it, you kind of lose it, and you need to practice making good choices and kind of living with the consequences. And you know, some people have made a lot of bad choices and dealt with the consequences, and we're here to support them in making better choices and healthier choices.
I totally agree with you. I think another reason why choice is important is that clients when you let clients make their own choice, they have to take responsibility for it, and we don't have to take responsibility for that. And so I think it's crucial to lay out those choices for people and letting them make their own decision, because then it's their responsibility. If it fails, it's on them. We don't have to take that ownership. And I think we spend too much time trying to make right decisions for people and worrying about it. And I think it shows that we have confidence in clients if we let them make their choices. Okay. So another thing we need to do, and I don't know, did we have 15 minutes of break?
I don't think it was quite 15 minutes, but I'm ready to proceed if you are.
Okay, no, that's fine. Um, we need to make sure the housing is safe, decent, and affordable. This means we need to have HUD standard of quality, the housing quality standards. And remember, I said if the housing is not HUD housing or some other subsidized housing, we need to be able um, to do our own housing quality standards. And I told you in Wiki, there's a form for that anybody can do a walkthrough of an apartment. We need to make sure that the housing is integrated and that the housing is in regular residential areas. We need to make sure that we are mixing people in with other people. We don't want to get into a situation where we find a couple of landlords who are good landlords, and we put everybody in their buildings, because all we're doing is creating another building that has people with special needs living. I need 5 minutes. I'll be back. Okay, can I get 5 minutes, people? I
Yeah,
I
I'm gonna
I have an urgent situation I got to deal with. 5
okay, I'm
minutes.
gonna mute you.
Thank you.
So Jan has a situation. She says, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm experiencing multiple clients that are grabbing at any and everything that will get them out of their present situation. Anyone got any advice or thoughts to share with Jan? I think this is a relevant question because the housing market is so tight these days, and Keneal says a lot of our clients are that way. And Mindy says, I think if they're willing to put in the work, that can be a positive mindset. And Michael says he's seen that too. Cedric says he doesn't hear any audio. Keneal says not only that, but there are not a lot of choices where we live. And Emily says, I find writing down all the options and doing trial and error technique, apply for what they can now and try other ones out along the way. And Keneal says, I think that if we get them stable, then we can work on greater goals. And Jan says, same here. And then Kit says, seems like half my work could be just keeping people in the homes they're in. Family is a huge obstacle to a lot of my clients remaining housed. If only I could provide case management to the family instead of finding new housing for an individual, things would be way better. And Michael says it's important to give people choices, even if they're not immediately available, and they might be able to work on getting their preferred choice. And Jan says not a lot of housing in our area. And Mindy says lack of choices is a problem in Skagit too. People lose momentum and sort of drop off. And then Keneal says, we have trouble with getting all documents and other requirements together. So folks, I'm gonna quickly take over the presentation, and I just want to share with you our real quickly our pathways to housing app basically. So let me present. Can you see the pathways to housing now? All right, so this is, I'll make sure that this link is included in the email that goes out. This is one of our nifty tools that we developed with the research and data analysis group. Here's some items you can talk about. Income limits by household size, and it talks about the HUD and community action. We've got a budget tool here that you can talk with folks about. We've got credit resources that you can share with them, and anybody could access these pages. So if they want to look at it on their own, that's awesome. We also have this rental application builder, so they can store their rental history and employment history and references all in this one place, and they don't don't have to memorize it. This is information about supportive housing services and HUD resources, and this is about permanent supportive housing and the impact that it makes. You might be able to find some of those statistics, and sorry you're having trouble hearing me, Cedric. Also, whoops, there's a veterans page, and it talks about housing resources for vets and other resources. Provider resources might be something more interesting for you guys. We have a peer training on here. It's 4 modules, and it talks about permanent supportive housing and fair housing, and it's really helpful. Here's stuff for providers if you need technical assistance. You can, I hope this email is still correct. I might have to let somebody know about that because we're no longer with HCA or DSHS. We're with HCA now. Here's some forms that you can use, that HQS, Housing Quality Safety Checklist that Pat was talking about, and preference surveys. This is if you don't want to go to the wiki. You can use these forms. You might even be able to edit them. See if it comes up in Word. Yeah, so you could even edit these for your own program. And then here's the information on the landlord outreach. Who's got some fact sheets, but it doesn't look like it has, well, maybe this one has the information about the Department of Commerce. Yeah, the landlord mitigation program is talked about here. And then talks about the golden thread for Medicaid services and the principles of supportive housing. We've got success stories. We've got know your rights for tenants and landlords, and just in general about fair housing. And then we've got additional tools here that include wellness and recovery and support tools. I'm going to check back with Pat to see if she's ready.
Hi, I'm sorry about that. I had an urgent call that I had to deal with, and I really apologize. So let's jump back in. Thank you, Wanda, for going through some of the resources for people. And how do I get back to my screen? Ah, okay. Excellent. Thank you, Wanda. So let's just jump in and go on. I really apologize. Let's see if I can get my slides to move. So another important thing about housing or permanent supportive housing is rights of tenancy. Residents have full rights in a tenant-landlord relationship. We expect that tenants in all housing will have a lease. There are going to be some programs that people will not have a lease. And, as long as it's documented that this is what the person chose and this is what they wanted, um, you're okay. But it's important to really make sure that we're documenting all of the options or things that when people do not have a lease. Because the lease, what the research shows us is that people, when they know that their housing is going to be safe as long as they follow their lease, and their lease is a standard lease, that people do better than when we connect that lease to things such as you must work with your social service person and you must meet with this person, twice a week and do all of these other tasks. So it really is about letting this person know that their housing is not contingent on any other program or treatment. I've had programs say, well, in order to keep your housing, you must not get hospitalized, you must take your meds. Um, I that when that's a lot of pressure on people when you have all of that stuff connected to your housing. And it causes people to fail. Um, and access to housing. Access to housing, we talked briefly about this. It means don't have any readiness requirements. We really need to work with people where they're at. Um, it we if a person has a mental health issue and are not taking their meds, it does not mean that they cannot be housed. What we need to do is work with them to figure out how, what housing they could get into and what housing, how help, ask them how can they help to keep this housing? What is it that they can do to keep their housing? People who are actively using can live in housing. Um, our job is not to judge whether or not somebody's ready for housing, because there is nothing out there that helps us to determine that. So what we have to do is go based on what the person says. When they say they're ready for housing, that's when we start working with them. And again, we need to make sure that the client is saying this. We should not assume that because a person is homeless, that they want housing. A lot of times what happens and what helps programs to fail is you need the bodies, you need the warm bodies for, in your housing program. And so sometimes you go out there and you find people who are homeless and you just assume that they're homeless, they need housing. People need housing when they say I need housing. People want housing when they say I want housing. And we need to make sure that we are flexible enough that when people want it, they can easily get to our housing program and we can work with them. But we don't go out there and try to force it on people and say, well, you're homeless, I'm sure you want housing, because that's how we set people up. That's how we push them into failure, is by, pushing them to say, that they want housing when they don't indeed want housing. I've had programs that it was part of the thing that people had to, get housing. And half the time the clients were just going through the motions without actually wanting housing because it was something that another program forced them to do. We need to make sure that this is the client's choice, and we need to let the client make that decision. Staff should not be making that decision for clients. We need to make sure that our services are flexible and voluntary, meaning that we need to be able to adjust to the person. The person's needs are going to change over time. We need to be able to adjust with them. We should be talking to people about what they want from us, what kind of support do they need from us. We need to be creative. I'll give you an example. I had a person who came to me and needed housing, and I helped her get housing. Well, I knew, based on conversations with her, I knew that her budgeting was an issue. And every time I brought up the word budgeting, she would be like, I don't want to do that. Or she would just shut down and not want to talk to me. So I had to be creative. So one day, we were talking and I was like, when do you get your check? And she was telling me the day she gets her check. And I said, so when do you go grocery shopping? And she was like, well, I just go and buy stuff when I need it. I don't go out and buy a lot of stuff. And I said, well, are you interested in going shopping and I can go with you and maybe, I could help you think about this a little bit differently. And she was like, sure, I guess we could go shopping. So we waited until she got her next check. We had set up a time to go to the grocery store. So when we were in the grocery store, I was looking at stuff and looking at what she purchased. And I'm like, looking at her going, so why did you get that brand when that brand costs more than this? And she looked at me and she was like, well, I know this brand. And I said, yeah, but let's look at this generic. The generic is the exact same as what you're buying, and it's $1 cheaper. And she looked at me like, it's the same? I said, yeah, it's the same. The generic is the same as this product. And so she was like, okay, I'll try it. It's $1 cheaper. And we went through the entire store doing that, where I was showing her how to look and see what the actual cost of stuff is by the cost per ounce, and how to compare things to each other in the store. I never said we were budgeting in the store, but I was finding a way to get her to start thinking about the choices she was making by just going through the store. I was also looking at the choices she was making and said, it's interesting. There, I don't see any fruit and vegetables in your cart. And most of the stuff you've been picking is high fat content. And I know that your doctor, you have diabetes, and that, have you been thinking about that, or have you talked with your doctor about, what some healthy choice options are? Um, and she looked at me and she was like, I don't do vegetables because I don't know how to cook vegetables. And if I have to cook it, I'm not going to eat it because I don't know how to do it. And then she was like, well, and certain fruit hurt my teeth because I haven't been to the dentist in a while. So I don't, I love apples, but I can't really chew into them. Um, I, that was a lot of information that I got that I didn't have before. So now I know I need to, connect with her doctor or get her permission to do it, or have her work with her doctor to talk about some healthy eating strategies. I also set up a time for her to go to, there was another program in the area that did teaching. They taught how to do healthy cooking. I got her set up with that. which she loved, and she, learned how to cook some stuff she never learned how to cook. I found the dentist that was offering low cost dentist, work done for people who had no income, to get her teeth fixed so that she could eat apples. But this was all just in one shopping trip. And she also learned a little bit about budgeting, even though she would have never said I learned anything about budgeting. And we did those trips once a month for about 3 months, where I would go shopping with her when she got her check once a month, and we would buy things. And over the 3 months, I saw her starting to look at the labels and look at how much things cost, and starting to buy more vegetables because now she had an idea about how to add them into her food. Um, and this was just over 3 months. And I was writing in my documentation that we talked about budgeting, we talked about, health, we talked about nutrition, we talked about her, the need for a dentist. That was all one session. I got a lot accomplished just with that trip. And I wouldn't say it was sneaky, but it was a way that I thought I could be creative and get her to think about budgeting in a way that was comfortable for her, and in a way that, I thought she could get something out of it. And in the future, we did eventually start talking about budgeting. Um, because, one of the things that I said, after those 3 months, I said, you're already starting to think about budgeting in a way that you probably never thought of. And she said, you're sneaky. And I said, I wasn't trying to be sneaky. I was just trying to find a way to get things done in a way that worked for her. And, what worked for her was going out and doing, and not sitting down and putting stuff on a piece of paper. And I think it was just as effective as if we would have sat down and put stuff on a piece of paper. But I had to be flexible. Does that make sense?
This is one, I think that's brilliant. And I have a comment or question from Michael about if housing is dependent on being in services, what if a person is no longer needing services, but they still need housing?
Well, here's the thing. We have to offer the housing, and it can't be connected to the services. Um, that means that somebody can move into housing and not ever see services. You might want to kick them out of your services because you're never seeing them, but they should not be losing their housing because they're not using the services. That housing should be based on their lease. And as long as they're following their lease, they should be housed.
So for some programs that do master leasing, though, it does require a person participate in services, and those would get scored lower on the
They
Fidelity scale.
they would get scored lower, and also that would be the person's choice. See, that's the thing, is you got to make sure that people understand up front that if it's a master lease, that's going to require them to interact with services on whatever, on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or whatever that is. And that should be told up front so that when the client chooses that, they know what they're choosing. Does that make sense? They know what the expectations are. I think we lose people if we say to them, okay, you chose this, and oh yeah, and by the way, this is part of this program. They should know that up front. And that should not be something that um we pop on them after they move into this housing. So as long as they know that up front, then it's fine that we have some elements on that, but you will get a lower score, but that's fine. That's not going to take you out of Fidelity. The only way you get out of Fidelity is if you're doing this type of thing for everybody, that other options aren't put on the table. The only option is we have master leasing, and here's the option: you have to move into this master leasing and you have to abide by that rule. That's, if you want to do that, and you will get scored lower, but that doesn't mean that'll take you out of Fidelity. That's the beauty of Fidelity, is that you can pick and choose where you want to take hits in your score. So if your thing is, we got this master leasing and it's great, it allows us not to have to work with landlords, and that's the option that we're giving everybody, that's fine. Do that. No, you're going to take a hit in that, but that means all the other areas you need to have good scores in. Does that make sense? So you don't have to get a perfect score in everything. Some places you're going to take a hit. And the thing is if you're the program manager or the manager of a program, you want to make sure you're on top of where you're going to take a hit. You don't want to take a hit in everything. Some things you want to have done perfectly, but if you want to do all of your housing through master leasing, you're going to take a hit. And that's okay. Am I making sense, or are people understanding this?
I'm not getting any responses back. I'd like to kind of just give an example. If you did market rate score or market rate rents for everybody, scattered sites all throughout the county, you probably get a pretty good score on choice, but you would lose points on affordability and some other things. So, I mean, it's kind of a give and take. You give a little and maybe you take a hit here and that sort of thing. So we're getting responses now. Riley says, making sense, Pat. Yes, says Cedric. Absolutely, says Camille.
Okay, good. So when you get to Fidelity, here's what you're gonna get. There's a range of scores, and the range is from 1 to 4. Sometimes some things it's all or nothing for some parts of the scoring. Sometimes it's all you can get is a 1, which means you're not doing it, or a 4, which means you're doing it well. There's no in between. Sometimes the score is 1 or 2.5 or 4. A 1 means you're not doing it, it's not implemented. A 2.5 means you're implementing parts, and a 4 means you're fully implementing it. So that's how the scoring goes. So when if you decide to be a Fidelity reviewer, you're going to be giving scoring to each area. And we're going to go through that. Another thing is, when you're doing the scoring, if you decide to do Fidelity reviews as a part of this contract, we do it in teams. It's not just one person doing it. So you will not be thrown out there on your own to do a Fidelity review. You will get parts of this to do, and you will work with the team, and an experienced person will be leading the team. That experienced person will be either Kimberly or Amanda, depending on where the location is. So if you decide to do this, which I recommend highly, know that you will be one of a group, and that there will be somebody in charge who understands all of the dimensions and is willing to answer questions and help you understand more when you're looking at an actual file or when you're looking at an actual program. The highest score you can get in permanent supportive housing on the Fidelity Toolkit is 28. I can tell you I've been doing this for Oh man, 25 years at the least, probably more like 30 years, but I'm trying not to age myself. I have never ever seen anybody get a 28. Anybody know why you can never get a 28?
Nothing is perfect, says Riley. And Keneal says because of choice.
Exactly, choice. When we give people choice, we can't predict what choice they're going to make. And some people are going to choose to make choices that will take your score down. And that's okay. Because if you're doing this correctly, your score may go down in one area, but the rest of the areas it'll be good, and we'll see we'll see that pan out when people get into their housing and keep it because they had a choice in the housing. So anytime there's choice, you cannot have a perfect score. So on dimension 1, the choice of housing, and I have another copy of this that I will show you. But when you're looking at types of housing, um, if you have a clean and sober house, what score do you think you would give a clean and sober house? If you're looking at choice of housing and the scores are 1, not implemented, 2.5 partially implemented, and a 4 is fully implemented, what score would you give a clean and sober house?
Getting some ones here.
It would either be a 1 or a 2.5 depending on the type of sober housing. 1, we would be looking at, did the person choose this type of housing? And the lease that they have. The lease, sometimes sometimes clean and sober houses don't give you a lease. And a lot of times clean and sober housing, I've seen people end up in them and the documentation is not there to support that this person chose this. So it depends on documentation, but more than likely, if people move into clean and sober housing, you're going to get a 1 or a 2.5. But that would be only for that person. So each person will get a score on choice of housing. I hope I didn't lose people there. So when you do choice of housing, you're going to look at each person and see if they had choice and give a score based on each person. And then all of those scores will be added up and divided by the number of people that you looked at. So say, for instance, I come to do a Fidelity review of your building or of your program, and you were doing master leasing. I'm just throwing out something. And everybody was staying in the master lease. So what I would look at is, did everybody choose that, or was that not even a choice? So if it was not a choice for people, but it was something that we decided we were going to do, you could get a 1. Unless I can see in people's files that they chose that was the choice. You put all the choices on the table and they chose that. If I see all of the evidence that people chose it, and that you put all the options on the table, that score can be a 4. But if they didn't have a choice, or if it was something that they really wanted their own apartment, but it wasn't available, but there was a clean and sober place, so that's where they went, your score is going to go down. We also want people to be able to see multiple units. So when you're working with people, and it doesn't have to be in person, it could be virtual, it could be pictures. But we want people to get a sense of what the possibilities are. And a lot of times you don't know that until you can see something. We also want to make sure that if a person says, a client says, no, I don't want this unit, I want something different, we want to make sure that that person stays in that line in the same position and not gets put back to the bottom of the line because they said no. Because if we start punishing people who we offer something to and they say, no, I don't like this, I want something different, we want to see that we did not force people into making a decision when they didn't want to because they were afraid they would go back to the bottom of the list. And then we also want to make sure that people have a choice in who lives with them. This is important that this is documented. If people are living on their own, great. But if somebody says, I really want to live with my significant other, we really need to work with that person to find a place where they and their significant other can live. And that may take off some of the subsidized housing off the table. And we need to let the client know that. We need to let the client know that if it's a subsidized unit, both of them have to qualify to be in that unit. If it's not subsidized, then yes, both of them can stay there, but both of them need to be on the lease and they both will have responsibilities to make sure the rent's paid. Making sense? Or am I confusing you?
Keneal says yes. Cedric says yes.
All right, let's move to an easier one. Separation of housing and services. All we want to see here is that the housing provider is only providing the housing and enforcing the lease and collecting the rents. We do not want to see service providers collecting rents. We do not want to see service providers giving out 10-day or 5-day or 3-day notices to the clients. Clients need to know that property management is running the property management and that they are the people who are going to make sure that the lease is followed, that the building's in good condition, and that the rent's being paid. It gets very confusing and very hard if the service provider is also the person collecting rents, is also the person that's enforcing the lease. Then what you have is the clients are not going to trust the service providers and not going to tell the service provider things that they may need to know. Like, for instance, they've started using a lot more drugs and that's why they can't pay the rent. They are going to be less willing to tell the service provider that if the service provider is also enforcing the lease. So we really want the clients to understand and know who they should be talking to about what. They should not be going to the property manager to talk about issues such as, their meds or their how they're feeling. We really don't want to put property managers in that role, and we really don't want to put staff in that role of trying to play both the property manager and the service provider. And so if your agency is providing housing, that you need to find a way to make sure that housing provider is separate, totally separate than the services. And that means that, say the property manager's out sick, that service provider should not be collecting rents because the property manager's out sick. The property manager needs to have something in place that tenants know where to pay their rent, and it should not be the service provider. And this only comes into effect if the agency is also providing the housing or doing master leasing. This is when this becomes an issue. If you're working with private landlords, separation of housing and services is usually you get a 4. It's only when you're doing your own housing that becomes something that you need to be concerned with. People clear about why those two have to be separate?
Jamie says conflict of interest, and Sarah and Mindy say yes.
Yeah, I look at myself and think, when I pay my rent, if I pay my rent to my therapist, that's going to be very different than paying my rent to a property manager, because that will change the dynamics between me and my therapist if that's the person who I'm giving my rent to. I might start to, either try to do the sympathy thing, get her to feel sorry for me so I don't have to pay my rent on time, or I could just stop talking to her about personal stuff, because if I tell her too much, she's going to get into my business. Dimension 3, the decent, safe, and affordable housing. So this one, we have to go tenant by tenant. How much does each tenant pay for rent? There is a very handy dandy spreadsheet in Wiki that will help you to track all of this information in one spreadsheet. And it makes a big difference when agencies use that spreadsheet, because it makes it much easier to go through this and look at each of the tenants and look at what they're paying for rent. But on dimension 3, where it's decent, safe, and affordable housing, you have to give each person, each client, a score for their housing. And that score is based on their rent amount. So if somebody's paying 30% of their income or less for rent, they get a 4, which means that they are perfect. That's a perfect score for that person. If the person is paying 30% to 40% of their income for rent, you get a 3. If somebody's paying 40 to 50% of their income for rent, your score goes down to a 2. If somebody's paying more than 50% of their income for rent, the score becomes a 1. And the reason I know this is because when you look at the sheet, and I should see if I can find a sheet for you to look at that has all of this information on there. And I'm trying to see if I have one open. And I don't do one. Do you by any chance have the sheet for the permanent supportive housing Fidelity sheet that lays out the scoring?
I do. It might take me a minute to
Yeah,
find it, though.
take your time, look for it, and that way when you find it, we can show it to people on the screen. I have it too, but it'll take me a while to find it. So you get a score on that. So what you do, if you have 30 tenants that you've placed, that you help find housing, and we have to go through each of those 30 people and give each one person a score based on how much they pay for rent. Then you take all of those scores and you divide it by 30, because that's how many people you had, and that's what your score is for rent payment. So it's gonna vary. You're gonna get sometimes they're weird scores. You could be a 3.4. You could be a 2.2. I mean, it could be all over the place because you're basically averaging it all out. The more people you have that you're working with, the more flexibility that there is for this score. For instance, if you only have 3 people in your program, and all 3 of those people chose Oxford housing, your score is not going to stand much of a chance, because you only have 3 people, and each of those 3 people will get a 1. and that means your score on this will be 1. But if you have 30 people and you have 3 people with Oxford housing and you get 1s on those 3, but everybody else has different scores, then those 3 people don't matter that much. So it really is about, numbers. And if you think about it, it's also about how many people you're helping to get into housing. When the caseload is small and you're not helping that many people as a team, it really does affect the score more so than if you have a larger number of people that you're working with. Does the housing meet HUD's housing quality standards? If it's subsidized housing, you're probably going to get a 4 because it's subsidized and it's had a walkthrough by HUD. If it's not subsidized, you have to do a walkthrough. If you do a walkthrough and everything's great, it's a 4. If some things are really not great on the walkthrough and it's a 2.5. If you don't do a walkthrough at all, it's a 1. If you don't go out to walk through the unit and give it the version of housing inspections that's in Wiki. Some people don't feel comfortable going out to do that. Also, I've had some people who moved into situations that going in and doing even the one that's in Wiki, doing that type of evaluation didn't make sense. For instance, I had one person who was moving in, he was renting a room from a homeowner. I did not feel comfortable going into this homeowner's house to do an assessment to give it a score. It was just not the right instance. So I didn't do it. I took a 1 on that because it wasn't gonna make sense to go into somebody's house when he's renting a room and do a walkthrough. So sometimes, and if people go into programs such as Oxford Housing or faith-based programs, sometimes that housing, it is what it is. You don't always get to do a walkthrough. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's subsidized and there's a walkthrough done. But for each person, you need to have proof if there was a housing quality standard done, except if it's subsidized housing. Subsidized housing, we just assume that all subsidized housing met HUD standard. If it's something other than that, we need to see something in the file that says there was a walkthrough that happened.
So Pat, I sent you that score sheet.
Okay, let's
Was
see
that
if let me pull it up. Hold on, people, bear with me. All right, let's see. This is one of the things we're going to talk about later, that I had up on my screen for you. Let me go to my
Yeah, I sent it via email.
okay, I'm gonna get to it. I just need to go in and look at it. So let's just get out of this. All right, thank you for bearing with me. I know this is not fun to watch me and my email, but this is virtual. So, and I do want you to be able to see this. Don't look at my junky mailbox.
I can move it to my screen if you want.
Oh no, it's coming up, I
Okay.
think.
That's weird.
What, that it's doing this?
Yeah, well, your email looks different than mine, I guess. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah. So if you look at this spreadsheet, this is a score sheet for anybody who has never seen a Fidelity score sheet. It's not a surprise. If you go into that link I gave you earlier, you will see this. You see at the top date, the agency name, and the assessor's names. So who all did the review is listed there. Um, if you look at choice of housing, it tells you what you need to do, what the housing options are. So you look at 1.1a, tenants have choice of type of housing. That gets a score. Real choice of housing unit, that gets a score. Tenant can wait without losing their place in line. That gets a score. And then all of those scores are added up together and divided by whatever the number, actually this divided by 3 because you're looking at 3 items. And that's the score for housing options. Then you get a score for choice of living arrangements. The tenants have control over the composition of household. So as long as you're letting people decide who they want to live with, you get a 4 on that. So it goes through, and if you look at this, I don't know if you can see my pointer or my mouse, but you can see where it breaks down how to do the score. It tells you right here under dimension, it says 1.1a plus 1.1b plus 1.1c plus 1 plus 2a divided by 4. Okay, so I gave you one. So you divide it by 4 and you come up with the average score for that dimension. And everybody will have this score sheet in front of them when they're doing a Fidelity review so that you know what you're looking for. It tells you everything that you need to look for when you're doing this. It goes through all of the dimensions, and it tells you how to add up and come up with the score for that dimension. So if you were on a team, each one person on the team will do this, and then as a team you meet together to talk about your scores and see, then you get to compare. Okay, this is why I gave it this is what I saw. That's important in doing that whole thing on, consistent scoring, which is how we work for doing permanent supportive housing Fidelity. It's consensus scoring. So that means everybody on the team gets to have a say in the score. And when you can't decide, you go to this form. And this form is out there too, and it's in that link. So there are no surprises. This form starts to tell you things that you're looking for. So if you look at this, it tells you, up here, it tells you what this dimension is about. It measures the degree of choice offered to the tenants. And then here it tells you this is what you need to get a 4. And then it tells you, okay, if you have this, so say instead of giving people full choice, you narrow down the choices for people. You don't put all the choices on the table. You decide, oh, this person's only going to get 2 options. There is either going into an Oxford house or going into this faith-based program that's going to really, do drops. This is the only choice for this person. That person would get a 2.5. You gave them some choices, but you didn't give them the full array of choices. We want to see people get the full array of choices, and that's how you get a 4. If people aren't given a choice, say you have your own building and you have a unit available and somebody wants housing, you show them that unit, that's all they get. They can take that unit or not. You're going to get a 1 because people weren't given the choice. If you look at, and then there's another thing, you looking at tenants can choose among multiple units. So it's not enough to just show people 1 unit. But sometimes people see 1 unit and they feel like that's the one and they don't want to see anymore. Then you might take a hit in your score, but they still got to choose. And it's okay to take those little hits. Remember, it's about the number of people that you're serving and whether or not those little hits will hurt you. If you're only seeing 3 people, then yeah, that'll hurt your score. But if you have 30 people, having some people, take the first unit is not going to really affect your score that much. If you look down here, there's 1.1C, and this is about people being able to wait. It tells you exactly what is needed for each score. So if you're designing your own program or you're working in a program, it's just as important to look at this as it is if you're doing a fidelity review. Because if you look at this, it tells you what this dimension is about and how do you get a score. So the fact that tenants can wait for the unit of their choice without risking discharge, it's telling you what you need to get a 4. It's telling you what you get, how do you get a 3. So when you're on this team and you're doing a fidelity review, you're sitting down and the team will go through and say, you might have somebody on the team said, I gave it a 2. And then somebody else would be like, well, no, I thought it was a 3. And then what you do is you go back to this and you say, let's read this. So for a 3, tenants can wait for the unit of their choice, but they are allowed a set number of choices before they lose priority on the list for units. Example, 3 choices and then go to the bottom of the list. That's what happens. That's how you get a 3. So if you limit choices of how many units people can see, and I know some programs have done that because they don't feel like it's in their best interest to go see umpteen units with the person before the person decides. I've actually worked with people I worked with this one woman that she saw 8 places before she decided. And I was getting tired of looking at places because to me, I wasn't seeing a big difference. But, I was just happy when she finally made the decision that this was the place. But that's very time intensive to do that with every person. So some programs have put a cap on it. We'll do 3. And then after that, we have to put you at the bottom of the list. That program would get a 3. It tells you exactly what you're looking at. You look at the choices of living arrangements. You get a 4 if people get to choose the members of their household, or can choose to live alone and have a private bedroom. People should have that choice, and that's how you get a 4. I hope this is helping. If I were you, I would make sure I have this form and I would have it copied and I would have it at my desk, because when you're in doubt about what your job is or what you're supposed to be doing, you can go back and look at this and see, okay, here's what I should be doing. And that I think is helpful. Is there a question on the floor?
Well, I was just going to take it one step further and say that I have recommended to HARPS teams to use this score sheet when they're writing their policies and procedures. What kind of program do you want to be?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And Wanda's bringing up a great choice, a great thought. Including this or using this to write your policies and procedures is what you want to do, because then when you have staff come in, they know what you're striving for. They know what this is about. Um, and they can make those decisions. So it really is, to me, this is one of the most important documents that if you're doing permanent supportive housing, whether you're a fidelity reviewer or not, this is one of the most important documents that you should have, because it lays out everything that people are looking for in the functional separation of housing and services. You get a 4 when the management staff has no authority or role in providing social services. Very simple. If you get a 2.5 if housing management and service staff have overlapping roles. You get a 1 if the same staff performs both housing management and services role. That's very simple, right? I mean, you look at it and you go, okay, here's where we are supposed to be. When what if we can't do this, if we can't let the staff be separate because we have a limitation in funds and we're going to have the same person doing both, you know that your program's going to take a hit on, separation. Not a bad thing as long as you're paying attention to all the other dimensions. You don't want to take big hits in every dimension because that's going to get you out of Fidelity. So there's all of these dimensions for functional separation of housing and services. If you look at decent and safe and affordable housing, let's see how accurate I was. I was pretty accurate. You get a 4 if it's 30% or less. You get a 3 if it's 31 to 40%. You get a 2 if it's 41 to 50, and you get a 1 if it's over 50. So when you're looking at rents, each person is going to get a score. So you may have, say you got 30 people, if you have 10 people that get a score of 4, that's, you add that up. So that's 10 times 40, that's 40. You got another 10 that get a 3. That's another 30 points. So that's 70 points. And then you got 10 people who get 1. That's 10 points. So you got 80 points, right? You divide 80 by 30. And that's how you get your score. So your score is probably gonna be 30 goes in the 80 twice, and then there's leftover. So your score is gonna be around a 2.5 or so. That's how you do the scoring for that dimension. Did that make sense? I'm gonna assume quiet means it makes sense. I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
Couple people said yes.
All right, good. The next one is about HQS, and it's really about how many people meet the housing quality standards. You get a 4 if all of the units meet that, and so that's where that form comes in handy. So if apartments are regular apartments, you can do the walkthrough and have the form in each folder. If 75% of your units meet HQS, you get a 2.5. If none of your housing meets HQS, you get a 1.
And Jamie asked, how do you score HQS section if program doesn't require an HQS inspection?
Well, the thing is, if you're going to do permanent supportive housing and you're going to do Fidelity, you have to, if you don't do it, and everybody's in a regular apartment, you will get a 1. I would advise doing the walkthroughs and use that form that's in Wiki and put that form in people's files so that you can at least do some walkthroughs of units and have that form in their file. It's not a hard thing to do the walkthrough. The form that's in there is fairly simple. It's just a walkthrough of the apartment, making sure that things work, turning on the stove, turning on the water, making sure that everything in an apartment works, and then having a copy of that in the file.
There's
Go ahead.
also a copy of that form on the pathways to housing, but I will be sending all those links to Amanda to forward to you guys after the presentation.
Yeah, Pathways is another good resource for you. There's a lot of documents in there that are very helpful to make your lives easier so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, because other programs have already invented forms to make this easier for them to keep track of. If
And
you look
Jamie
at
asked, so we don't have to actually be certified HQS inspector to do that, correct?
No, you do not have to be qualified. Not you have to be qualified if you're doing the HUD HQS. But if you're using the one either in Pathways or Wiki, you do not have to be certified.
Thank
And
you.
it's simple enough for anybody to be able to do it. If you look at housing integration, it tells you right here what we're looking at. It says people live in housing units where 0 to 25% of all the units have been set aside for people meeting disability related eligibility criteria, and the remaining units are not set aside for any special needs. So basically what this saying is you can move people into a regular apartment and get a 4 for that person. But you get into trouble when you find landlords who are willing to work with you and you start filling up all their units with people. Then you're basically creating a non-integrated building. And I know people will argue that, okay, yeah, we created this non-integrated building, but it is in an integrated community. And so, we want you to just be mindful. We don't want to create buildings that are only set aside for people with special needs. We don't want to put everybody into Oxford housing. Don't want to put everybody into clean and sober living. We really want to mix people throughout. We know that community integration helps people. It helps people to not sit around with everybody who has the same issues and they just kind of get into that wallowing in it and talking about how horrible things are. We know when people are integrated into the community, they start to do things a little bit differently. They may pay attention to more things. Um, so you really have to think about this and think about um, what you're doing and making sure that you're getting the outcome you want or that your program wants. If you look at rights of tenancy is fairly easy because what you're looking at is do people have full rights of tenancy? And if you have a copy of everybody's lease in the file and those leases are in their name, then you're going to get a 4. And then you look at the next item is looking at whether or not people have to comply with special rules. So if people are complying with special rules, say you have to be sober or you have to be med compliant, that's going to reduce your score in the second part of rights of tenancy. So if people are in regular housing with no special provisions in their lease, you're going to get a 4. If there are rules in the lease that says, oh, this person has to do this service, and if they don't do it, they can get evicted, that's going to give you a 2.5. If your tenancy is based on non-compliance with program or failure to participate in treatment, meaning if you're not maintaining sobriety, you get kicked out, then that's going to be a 1. So anybody who is being put in housing where their behavior is a part of their lease, say they have to be clean and sober. So that would be probably a lot of the Oxford housing, wouldn't it? So if people are going into Oxford housing, it's more than likely if the lease has a lot of stuff on there saying you get kicked out if you do this, then you're probably going to get a 1.
Okay, Pat, looks like we're at noon, which is our end time. Does anybody have any questions they have right away, or?
If you look at it, we didn't get through all of them, but if you look at the table, you see what each one is looking for, and that's your scoring, and that's what you need to pay attention to, regardless of whether you're being a Fidelity reviewer or not. If you're just working in the program, that's what you're looking at.
So correct me if I'm wrong, there's a part 2 to this presentation on Friday morning at 9 o'clock to noon?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a continuation. It may be for the other side of the state. But
Okay, gotcha.
if people were in this one and they want more information, come to the one on Friday. And if you have questions, we'll try to get those questions answered.
All
If you
right.
have questions now, I mean, let me give you my email address. So if you have questions about Fidelity reviews, you can send them to me. It is P as in Paul Tucker, T as in Tom, UCKER at A as in Apple, H as in Harry, P as in Paul, net.com. So ptucker@ahpnet.com. Feel free to email me, anybody, if you have questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all for joining us, and we'll send out that follow-up email. Thank you, Pat, for your presentation. As always, wonderful.
Thank you, and sorry about the interruption. That won't happen again. I'm going to turn off all my other phones and monitors.
No problem. Emergency is an emergency. You have a great
Yes.
day.
You too. Thank you, everybody.